Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Survivor Stockwatch podcast. I'm your host, Taran Armstrong, and I am here today with my good friend, Lita. How you doing, Lita?
I'm good. Hi, Taran. Happy Thanksgiving.
Yes, we're here on a Friday, early in my morning, at least. I guess it's afternoon for the East Coast.
No,
Um,
it's still I would like to validate that the day after Thanksgiving, noon is still morning.
Okay, fair. Um, we took of course Thanksgiving off for the podcast, but here now to talk about. I mean, what a big episode here to talk about as well. Massive happenings, moves being made, people being betrayed, all kinds of wild things to talk about here on the Survivor Stock Watch. We're going to get into all of the decisions that were made strategically throughout the episode, as well as rate the players. I mean, major shifts, I imagine, in some of these player ratings as the game has been blown wide open this week, Lita.
Yeah, I think the odds that I cry on this podcast are about 80%, given how much I cried at the episode.
Fair. It was an emotional episode for so many different reasons. And that's I've seen a lot of love for this episode, and I think it's all warranted. I mean,
Yeah.
it has, I think, something for everyone except for like the people that really love advantages, maybe. But I don't know how many of those are out there.
And are they podcast patrons? Are they watching this? Are they RHAP fans? If they're like, I live for advantages. I don't know.
It's hard to imagine somebody watched this week's episode and was like, "Yeah, it was all right." You know what it could have used though? Like 5 more advantages.
Yeah, like rolling a freaking dice to determine $1 million for
Yeah.
somebody. Yeah, I was relieved to see no advantages, but I think like I'm sure this has been said. Because of the holiday, I have not listened to like any podcast about this episode, so I do apologize if I like repeat anything that has already been well trodden ground. But like I think regardless of the outcome, which obviously like I did not like at all and was very upset about, I think the thing about it was just like a restoration and hope for modern Survivor. And I think that's like why a lot of people were um emotional about it, not just because of like the dynamics, which were amazing, and the actual strategic and social bonds instead of the advantages, but just literally like the first episode in so long that I've walked away from just being like, oh, I love Survivor. Like there's nothing like this. After 41 years, they can still do this. And I think what made it particularly good and emotional for me was that there were elements of like the kind of new editing style that they're doing that really worked for the
Yeah.
first time. Like I've hated the flashbacks. I've hated a lot of the new stuff that they're trying. But this like the music over the Shan vote and just everything, like the foregone conclusion between Shan and Liana, instead of trying to make it seem like it was going to be one or the other, just being like, we're giving her a proper send off. It was new and different and it worked so well. And I think it made so many people cry.
Absolutely. And I mean, I've been a fan of the editing. I like the flashbacks. And I really like what they're doing here. And also a fan of the editing in the sense that I know that there have been some, Edgic people that have already been surprised, but I really did I was surprised last week and I was surprised again this week. I really didn't think Evie was gonna go, and I also didn't think that Shan was gonna go. I felt like it didn't seem like it was their time yet, and I really felt like Shan was the top contender here to win the whole thing, both edit wise and for the most part game wise. I mean, I did rate her much lower last week because I did not love that move, and we'll talk about that throughout the episode. But I feel like they're doing so much right here when it comes to their storytelling, and I'm really excited to see where this season goes, because I really do feel like not only is the game wide open, but also just like it feels like almost anyone can win.
I wish that I felt that way. I have been convinced of a winner for a long time and am hoping that it is not a march towards that.
We will see. We will see. All right. Well, let's what we're gonna do here. We're gonna go through the episode. I want to also kind of talk about some of the decisions made in this episode strategically, and then we will rate the players based on how they did in this episode and how they are looking, short term and long term prospect wise in the game, and we will give them those ratings in the Stockwatch portion of the podcast. So let's talk about the episode because again, it was a good one. We entered the episode immediately. We got confirmation that that Xander was blindsided by the Evie vote. Xander was not in on it. That is the impression that we got last week. And then we see Ricard taking credit for the Nasir move. That he really is like heading up the story of like, well, this is how Nasir went. I thought of this idea, and I told Shan to use the extra vote. And it's just one more element to this relationship that him and Shan have, where they are both such gamers, and we've saw all the way back at UA this dynamic of like he wants credit for coming up with the ideas, and she's kind of like the person that executes the ideas often. And this idea of like who's going to get credit, who's going to win if we both get to the end, when are we going to turn on each other because we both know it's going to happen. It's such an interesting relationship.
Have there already been Dom and Wendell comparisons with these two?
I definitely thought of it during this episode. I had not thought of it prior to this episode. I think mostly because with Dom and Wendell, they both seemed like they really loved each other. And I'm sure that
Yes.
Ricard and Shan love each other.
Mhm.
But like with Ricard and Shan, they have been, bickering throughout the whole season. Whereas Dom and Wendell were much more like, it's gonna suck, but we know it's coming.
They're like if Dom and Wendell and Cass and Spencer had like a survivor baby.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Where they're like, we're stuck with each other in the Cass and Spencer kind of way. We're stuck with each other, but we don't like it. But then the Dom and Wendell thing of like, we respect the hell out of each other.
Mm-hmm. I mean, also in the sense that if they are a baby, right? Then Erica has called it out. She says that Shan is a baby with a machine gun. With that idol.
To me, that doesn't sound that dangerous. Babies don't have very strong fingers, or like they can't really lift it. So
yeah,
I feel like monkey is generally the comparison.
With a machine gun. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know. I feel like
I think monkey with a handgun is the expression, and Erica just leveled it up.
if I don't know, if I saw a baby with a machine gun, like I think if the baby has the machine gun, it's not just next to the baby. It's already like in the baby's possession. It's holding the machine gun in some way. And at that point, I am worried.
Yeah, I would take it back a little and say if I saw a baby, I'd be worried. So I don't think I would get. I don't think I would register what it was holding.
Classically, Lita is not a fan of babies.
Famously.
Also, I imagine not a fan of guns. So the combination of the two of them.
You imagine?
Yeah.
You don't have confirmation on that? You've never spoken to me ever?
Well, I mean, in the hands of a baby, maybe things change. Sometimes two things you hate combined become something you like.
Yeah. Famously, Taran thinks that two wrongs make a right. This is going to turn into the American Enjoyer podcast. People are here for strategy, and we're going to be debating the mechanics of babies with machine guns.
I mean, look, I think that if anybody appreciates me as a podcaster, they understand that I'm willing to analyze anything, including babies with machine guns.
Yeah, so this is the Cass, Spencer, Dom, and Wendell baby with a machine gun.
Yeah.
Is Shannon and Ricard.
Exactly. And like a baby with a machine gun, dangerous potentially even to itself. So Erica is going to pitch to Deshawn that they should take a shot at Shan. And this is kind of what I talked about last week, where I felt like the play that Shan and Ricard made, particularly Shan, To save Erica and Heather and take out Nasir did not necessarily mean that the relationship between Shan, Erica, and Heather was going to improve, especially considering how they did it by splitting their votes in the way that they did, making it very clear that they didn't trust Erica and Heather at all. And we're seeing immediately that that Erica is essentially, I mean, Erica has a choice. She can go with Shan and Ricard, who are now a little bit rudderless. They've still got Liana, maybe, or they can go with Deshawn and Danny. And the relationship seems to still exist here with Deshawn. And Erica approaches Deshawn about this, that they should take a shot at Shan. And Deshawn is definitely entertaining the idea that night. However, Shan sees that they're talking and recognizes that, like, they're talking about me. I think they
Mhm.
might be talking about me. And so she approaches him the next morning, and they talk through something that, if you watched Big Brother 23 or 20, I don't even remember now, 23, yeah. The numbers, there's too many numbers. This conversation will likely ring a lot of bells for you because it's so similar to what we saw in Big Brother 23 with the cookout. And I know I've talked a little bit about this on this podcast, but if you haven't watched the most recent season of Big Brother, there was a group of Black players, 6 of them, that came together and formed an alliance. They called it the Cookout, and the goal was to get the first Black winner of Big Brother. And it eventually became to get all 6 of them to the final 6, and really just like not betray each other at all prior to that. And there was a lot of conflict that arose because of this goal, because it's not good for everybody to get to the final 6 with a particular set of people. It's only good for a certain amount of people. And so a lot of sacrifice has to be made. And this is what we're seeing in this conversation between Shan and Deshawn. It's hard for them to balance their self-interest and their desire to do this for the culture. And we see Deshawn really shaken up about this. I mean, he says we don't get these opportunities very often, and so like, what am I going to do for myself in this situation? Like, how do I navigate something like this? And we got to see a lot of this on Big Brother because we had the live feeds. Not a lot of it was on the episodes. Sometimes it was, but for as much as we're seeing here, it seems likely that this was discussed a lot more, even in the game, and not only the pressure of wanting to do something positive, but also probably the pressure of like, well, I can't not do this. Like I'm a lot of people are counting on me. People will be disappointed if I don't follow through with something like this. And there are so many dynamics here. It was a great episode. I wish that we had been digging into this a little more prior to this moment, because I feel like that would help uh, make the impact even greater. But considering that, again, we've seen a lot of this on Big Brother, I think we can sort of again assume that this is something that really did have an impact on these players and the strategy.
Yeah. I obviously, like, I have the utmost respect for what these people are trying to do. I wish that they would consider that, like, Black women never benefit from this, and, like, to look at it just as, like, as race, it's important, but we know every time there's equal representation on these shows, it's a man that benefits. We had Cook Islands, we had Fiji, we had Xavier on Big Brother. And it's just so disappointing that it's always the Black women who are like laying down their torches so that another person of color can win. And it's never even been like a serious threat. Like Cook Islands, Becky and Sandra were like jokes. Like same with Fiji. Cassandra was like never in contention. We haven't had a Black woman winner of Survivor since season 4. 4. So like I just feel like there is so much at play here, and I just feel like the women of color are always sacrificing more for the culture than it is for Black men. So it's frustrating to see Shan go out in this way after this conversation. Um, and there's data to back this up, data done by me that when you solve for gender, it benefits white women, and when you try to solve for race, it benefits men of color. And if you're at the intersection, there's just like still so much structural inequality that like it just doesn't end up benefiting you in terms of winning.
Mhm.
And we saw this with Tiffany too. She got way more on not Tiffany on Survivor, but we won't get into Big Brother, but it was something that came up a lot on
Mhm.
Big Brother as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to which again is like it's a whole like there's so much to dig into in regards to how these things impact not only the game but society as a whole, but certainly the game and so we're seeing this conversation, and I think in terms of how the show is portraying this conflict, it's this is like most of what we get about this,
Mhm.
queuing up the conflict, the situation that they find themselves in. So we get to the reward challenge where Ricard is going to win it, and he picks Shan, Heather, and Xander to go with him on the reward. I did I did like these picks.
Oh, I did not.
You
But
did
so
not. Okay.
explain. Yeah.
Well, so I liked the picks because I think that grabbing Heather. First of all, he had good reasons to pick these people. Again, like Shan hasn't been on a reward. Xander's given up a reward. Heather, I think, hadn't been on a reward or something. And by picking Xander and Heather, he gets the opportunity to further his relationship with them. I think those are probably the two people that he had the. I mean, it's hard to know, but it seemed like the least amount of relationship with. He really seemed to be closest to Erica, between Erica and Heather, and didn't have a huge relationship with Xander, who is still fresh off of a betrayal by Danny and Deshawn, so is likely to be able to, want to create new connections. And by picking Shan, he's not like completely pissing Shan off then to the point where like she might start turning on you, which obviously ends up paying off in this very episode. So I felt like this was like probably the best he could do from my perspective.
Hmm. I think Shan was a good pick, but I thought that leaving those four behind, like you're already shaky on Erica and know that she's playing fairly hard based on what we're hearing on everything. Leaving Danny and Deshawn and Liana together, knowing that there's probably something happening there, like it just seemed like um picking the two white people after the conversation that we just had. It just seemed like he should be trying to make more bridges, but I'm always bad at like I mean, my philosophy is always be throw in reward challenges, always, because I think it's really hard to suss out who you should pick on the reward, especially because it's a very personal thing with food. You don't know who's gonna care. Like there are
Yeah.
people who will not give a crap about Survivor Pizza, and there are people who will cry over it. And I think it's really hard to know on any given day, like who are going to be the people that are burned by that.
Yeah, I mean, on record, we've seen many people talk about Survivor Pizza being basically garbage.
Hmm.
So I don't know. I noticed that they didn't really make a big deal of the pizza. Again, I mean, the pizza was it was no.
Grilled cheese back at camp.
Yeah. Also, Shan is vegan. She's gonna like she's better off not eating the pizza. I'm just saying she's gonna get very sick.
Oh, and Xander is paleo. I don't think he can eat the pizza either.
I know, and I thought that so Shan says Xander and I can split the veggie. So I was like, oh, is Xander a vegetarian? Love that for him. And then somebody was like, he's paleo. I was like, that doesn't make any sense. Why would he like veggie pizza is not any more paleo than meat pizza?
Yeah, paleo is like almost the opposite of vegetarian.
I know. Yeah. And it's well, I won't insult people's diets, but
All
I don't
right. Well,
understand it.
well, After the reward, with the non-reward people, we hear from Danny, who is saying that Ricard is somebody that they have to stop before he gets to the end. I mean, this guy, he has already won immunity before. He's always been doing well in challenges. He's now won another reward challenge. He's close to Shan. He seems to have momentum behind him, and I'm sure the whole like storytelling of I made this move on Nasir did not help his case in terms of his threat level with Danny, who wanted to make that move himself. And so Danny pitches to Deshawn that they need to take that shot at Ricard, and they can't wait to make this move in the sense that they can't delay the decision. They have to make this move now, which I think is, I mean, I think this is pretty close to the right call. I think that they did need to do something to limit Shan's power. They didn't feel like they should take the shot at Shan herself, which is still probably, I mean, taking Ricard out is a better call than taking Shan out, in my opinion. Even without all of the other things attached to it. And so I think this is pretty much the right move by them. However, I do not like the way that they went about it. In particularly, there are two primary decisions about this move that they're going to make. First, they want to make the move without Shan knowing. Now, I can understand why they would want this, especially if they still plan to go to the end with Shan. I mean, from my point of view, Shan beats all of them in a final three situation. And so if they're able to make a move without Shan knowing, without Shan being in on it, it gives them some separation, which seemed to be one of the themes of this whole episode was Liana, Ricard, Deshawn, Danny. They all wanted some separation from Shan to have a move on their resume that was their move and not just what Shan wanted. So you can see why they would maybe think, all right, like let's make a move that she's not in on. It's very Tony of them, right? And then she'll have no choice but to come back to us, like what Tony does with his allies, where he makes a move that they're not in on, and then he wins them back over after it happens. And now he is the person that is the leader of the strategy. So you can
The
see that.
only the only context in which I would ever think of Shan and Trish from Kaguya in the same same thought.
And that is exactly where I was going, which is that Shan is not Trish.
Yeah.
Shan is not the person, in my opinion, that would, as Deshawn says, have nowhere else to go and just come back to them. I think that Shan would be like, oh, is that how it is? All right, then. Let me just hum some music for you.
Yeah, blindsiding somebody in your alliance who has an idol at 7, not great.
Yeah. And then the thing that really sinks the whole thing for me, because even then, like, you can still maybe see how this could work, is that they attempt to get Liana in on it. And on one hand, again, I can understand the logic behind this. The logic is, if we do get Liana in on it, then really Shan has no other option, right? We've taken away Ricard, and because Liana was in on it, who is she going to go to? With Liana in on it, it guarantees that Shan comes back. But I mean, I don't know how they saw it on the island, but from my perspective, watching Liana this season, I mean, there was no chance whatsoever that I would ever think that Liana would be in on this. Now, there is a secret scene that we'll talk about that definitely helps further imply that how I think a lot of the viewers are seeing it is how they saw it on the island. That Liana apparently did have a very public kind of insecurity about the fact that Shan was basically in charge of her game, right? That this is a very common sort of perception of Liana's game. And so they probably thought, hey, Liana, this is just like how we want. This is your opportunity to differentiate yourself from Shan's game. But I just the what we eventually see, the emotional connection between Liana and Shan, was so strong. And I think that even though it makes perfect sense on paper, you cannot just try to force this move through without understanding who Liana is and what kind of relationship she has with Shan. I don't think this is ever going to work considering those things. Even if you wanted to, even if it would be great if it did, because it doesn't, I think you have to reconsider the entire thing. And this was, I think, the big mistake here for Deshaun and Danny.
Yep, this is literally the exact thing that makes Survivor great, is that you have to account for these relationships. Also, Liana is 20. I think she is more susceptible to having these sort of emotional decision-making processes than other people who are a little bit older and a little bit maybe wiser, more hardened. Having somebody in the game who would rather lose to their friend than win is good for Survivor. I will say this forever. I don't care like what people say about wanting to have everybody like playing to win, playing to the death, whatever. It would not be a good game if everybody was playing the exact same way and playing optimally all the time and you're just waiting for somebody to make an unforced error. It is good for the game to have these people there, and it's good for TV. So I loved that. I also thought what was really interesting was when they go and that they showed this, I think means something to me, is that they go to Liana and they say, somebody is getting too much power and they're unstoppable. She goes, I know who you mean. Erica. Nope. Shan. Nope. Like, clearly their perceptions of the game are so different. Danny and Deshaun and Liana, that to go to her and have such a misread is not that surprising, because they're clearly are seeing the game totally differently. That like they're like, Ricard is a threat, he's an unstoppable force, and Liana is like, okay, Ricard, really? Like they are playing from very different perspectives.
For sure, yeah. And actually, I think it's a good time to talk about the secret scene because it ties into all of this. So I don't know if you've seen it, Lita, but in the secret scene,
Is it the Xander one?
yes,
Then I've seen it, yes.
yes. Okay, so Xander says, "Hey, I may as well go out and check to see if there's another idol in circulation after Nasir went out with one in his pocket. Maybe there's another one hidden. Maybe there's not, but there's no harm in looking." So he gets up early and he goes to look for a re-hidden Nasir idol. And Deshaun and Liana are like, yeah, we're not going to just let him look for an idol. They're going to follow him around. You know, not going to let him get away with this. This has happened many times before. You know, Malcolm was followed. Russell Hantz was followed. And so this one, though, in particular with Liana and Xander, is, as Liana describes it, very like brother and sister, because anytime he goes to reach for something, Liana is like on top of him, like shoving him out of the way, swatting his hands away. He's like, just like an annoying little sister. And he's like, I'm not gonna lie, she started to bother me. So I wanted to mess with her back. And he says, I know that she's insecure about having no power in this game. And like essentially that Shan, you know, controls her every move. So he decides, this is how I'm going to mess with her. I'm going to go to Shan like she's our mom, to be like, Mom, my sister's like being annoying. And he goes over to Shan. He's like, Shan, can you help? And then and like the funniest part about the scene is that it works. Even though Liana knows exactly, like, Xander thinks that I have no agency over myself and that you're going to be able to just tell me what to do. And Shan's like, well, I think you guys just need to talk it out. And eventually Liana's just like, all right, fine, Xander, you just have a good idol hunt. And Shan's like, let me go talk to her. And it's very funny. I think very enlightening about, again, Liana's position in the game, both with a potential jury and her position in the game, and probably why Danny and Deshaun felt like they could approach her with a strategy like this, and ultimately why she turns it down.
It is, but I also just want to point out that if you're Xander and you're saying, I need to go tell mom, you also have no power in the game, and Shan also controls your game. Like, I feel like because Xander wasn't like really present during this episode, I mean, he's also 20, and I think is not uh, I think it shows, and I think people don't talk about how much it shows just as much to me as it does on Liana. But I think Xander is just as lacking in agency and just as immature, and I do think it's not talked about as much.
Well, I mean, you're previewing my ratings already.
Oh, okay. Well. But I think like the secret scene, like the takes that I've seen on it are like, oh, it's so funny, like Xander's messing with Liana about like this insecurity. It's like Xander should have the same insecurity that he
Well,
has
I
to
mean,
go to
yeah,
mom.
I think probably the thing is that, first of all, he's the one telling the story, but second, like,
Mhm.
I think he's telling it accurately in that they are like a brother and sister
Right.
in this moment, both the youngins here,
Mhm.
and both being a little immature about it. Um, so that's how Liana is being perceived in the game, but we go over to the reward challenge, and we see we basically skip over most of this. I don't know if Ricard talked a little more with Heather and Xander, or if what we saw was really the only important thing that came from this, but it was a very interesting conversation. Shan and Ricard talking to each other about
Right next to Heather,
yeah.
just Heather not even trying to eavesdrop. Like, girl, what is wrong with you?
Um, they're talking about how they aren't going to take each other to the end, essentially. And it is funny because you see this in Big Brother a lot too, where just like people do feel comfortable just like they're next to us, but if we're quiet enough, they're not going to hear us. Like they can also like they can tell you're whispering, like
Yeah.
and they weren't whispering. Um, but this was an interesting conversation because and they talked about this a little bit on the know-it-alls. Like normally you would just lie. Like
Yeah.
you'd lie and you'd both know that it was a lie. And that's sort of how it works. But and to me it felt more so Ricard that wanted the openness than Shan. Like Ricard is talking about how like they know they can't go to the end together. And he knows that he can't go to the end with her. She will beat him. And she's saying, well, from my perspective, a man usually beats the woman. He's like, yeah, but in 2021, like in this season. And she's like, fair.
What?
Um,
That's not fair. That actually makes no sense. Just
well, I
to be
mean,
clear.
I do think that Shan beats Ricard,
Sure, but it's not because it's 2021.
Hmm.
Women have beaten men
Or that
before.
it's also not because she's a woman. Um,
Yeah.
but um, but they're having this conversation, and Shan is just like, no more of this, no more of this. I don't want to have this conversation anymore. Which again tells me that like Ricard is the one who I think knew that soon he was going to have to make this move, and he wanted to be open about the fact that he was going to make it. And ultimately, I think this pays off. What we will eventually see is that Shan really does respect the move by Ricard, and seems to not be upset about it.
Mhm.
So being this open about it did help him. However, it did put him in a slightly more dangerous position because knowing that he was going to turn on her, she could have just let him go this week,
Mhm.
this episode. And it was her emotional connection to him, in part at least, that kept him safe. And by letting her know that he was not going to the end with her, he opened himself up to first of all her being prepared when he took the shot, and second, her not protecting him as far as he needed her to in order to get to a place where he could take the shot. However, I also feel like, especially when I thought about this a little bit more, Shan was somebody that connected pretty deeply to a lot of the players that she was with. And we saw, especially on UA, she had a lot of difficulty in letting a lot of these people go.
Mhm.
Um, but it's Ricard perhaps the shadiest of all, who has openly told her that he will turn on her, that has, argued with her about advantages and credit, that she really kind of like, you know, puts her foot down and says, not this one, not this time. And I wonder if part of that was because of how open it was. That because they had talked about it, because it wasn't something that was separate from the relationship. Like the relationship being, we're together, we would never betray each other, but secretly over here, I'm thinking about betraying you. Instead, everything was out in the open. And in some ways, I think that can bond you even closer to somebody
Yeah.
because you're not hiding that element of yourself, of those thoughts. And I think it's super interesting. And I really wish, I honestly, I wish we would see more. I will often wish that I had live feeds for Survivor, but this relationship in particular makes me want them.
Yeah, there's a devil you know element for sure, and just like that there is so much like not knowing where you stand on the island that like I mean people talk about this with loved ones where they're just like they don't even know like how to act where when it's somebody that you could like actually trust. And I feel like with Shan sort of part of that facade was dropped, and so it was like such a relief to like be able to talk through scenarios like knowing that you can actually be real. But I think also it's just like going through so much with somebody, ups and downs, makes it like potentially even more difficult than to get rid of somebody than if like you were just their best friend, which is also emotional. But I think just being like this has been like my partner in this game, or at least my uh parallel person playing with me this whole game, and we've gotten through tumultuous times as well as good times. But it is interesting that this is the one time, and there's also an element of probably she wanted to be the one to come up with the plan to do it. She didn't want to just join somebody else's plan to do it.
Yes, yeah. I definitely think in terms of why she tells Ricard, I think that it's a shot being taken at her. So there's definitely an element to this that's not just protecting Ricard, but also
Of
just
course, yeah.
herself. But there's so much to like about the editing, in my opinion, of this episode. Uh, this is, I think, it's great that they included it. I think they probably would have. It was a funny moment to begin with, but I mean, what luck that I mean, what a moment that Shan starts to hum her evil song. And in this episode, her boot episode, she gets caught.
Hmm.
It's like, what are you humming there? And it's just it's such a perfect representation of like just her empire falling, right?
Too cute, as they say. Too much. But I mean, many people still did not see her boot coming, so I think you could also read this as sort of like, wow, she's so good that she's doing all these things out in the open and still not and still getting away with it.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And I probably would have if she goes on to win, right?
Right.
But instead it plays this way, and I think it plays so well. So we get back to camp, and Liana tells Shan about the Danny and Deshaun plan. She says that nothing was more important to her than her moment with Shan at that summit, the way that they were able to connect and relate and bond. She cannot let that go, even though it it likely means, and I think that's part of the emotion here, right? Is that I think that in this moment she is accepting, and I find Liana's storyline this season to be so interesting too, because she comes in a fan of the game. She's young. She wants to make big moves. She wants to be a legendary player. She wants to follow in the footsteps of Sandra. And she felt like there were a couple of times where she was about to be that person, and then just falls flat on her face multiple times. And now she's seen as a laughing stock in the game. She's seen as somebody that is a lackey, that has no agency in the game. And she has an opportunity to maybe turn that around, and to get out ahead of Shan in the way that a lot of other people in the game are. But ultimately, she chooses not to. She chooses not to take what was clearly so important to her, because of how much she values this relationship with Shan. And I think she understands what she's giving up here, right? She's accepting her defeat in the game. She's saying, even if it means I go to the end with her and I lose, I cannot go against her. And she's emotional as she says this, and I think that's so fascinating. This is a person. This is not a person who came onto the show like lying is bad, friendship is good.
Right.
This is a person who was like, nah, I'm here to play, here to make big moves. And throughout the season, she's been trying. And I just find this so interesting, and I'm super curious to know where she goes from here, especially now that Shan is gone. But this is such a great culmination of everything we've seen from Liana to this point.
It's also it must be so hard for Liana because, like, I'm not sure how much she's aware of this, but the fact that she is the one to betray Danny and Deshawn's trust by telling Shan about this, and then Shan is the one who goes and tells Ricard. Nobody is talking about Liana betraying them. Everybody's only talking about Shan being the one to break their trust. They're saying, oh, we were going to go to the 4, but now Shan has betrayed us, even though they obviously were going to betray her by leaving her out of the Ricard vote. But nobody is talking about how Liana was the one to spill the beans. And that's like, I mean, on one hand, I guess it could be fortunate for Liana that she's not like facing their wrath or whatever, but it also just shows like kind of how insignificant she is to them, that they're not even like mad at her for doing that.
Yeah, and they probably were to an extent. We just didn't see it, but we probably didn't see it because it wasn't particularly relevant.
Yeah.
And I also think that that part of this as well is that, and we'll talk about this when it comes, but when Ricard does tell Deshawn about the whole situation, I think the biggest part of it for Deshawn was not necessarily that the information got out, but that the plan was then put in place to take him out of the game, which was not necessarily coming from Liana, but coming from Shan. Which I think helps kind of explain the Shan specific feeling of betrayal. However, I mean, that's what we have to talk about now. Shan finds this information out. They want to take a shot at Ricard, and they want to leave Shan in the dark. Shan does not want Ricard out yet, and in response, she says, "That's it. Deshawn has got to go." And this is something that we've seen from Shan throughout the season, right? Like, she has been a very she's quick to respond with a reaction when provoked, right? When Heather stands up in the middle of tribal and says, "Hey, maybe we should take out Nasir," the whole plan to take out Xander and split the votes, all that's dropped, and she said, "Let's just take out Heather. Let's just get rid of her." And we see this. We've seen this a few times with Shannon. We've seen a few times where like she's really kind of made some choices in the moment that she's then been like, maybe not. And I think we see this here, right? She doesn't need to go after Deshawn. All she needs to do is put a stop to the plan on Ricard, right? Like, and maybe the only way to do that is to take out Deshawn, but not necessarily. So the plan in place is to take the shot at Deshawn. That's what she wants to do now. And so she approaches Ricard about this. And again, very not only interesting conversation, but this should have raised, I think, many red flags with Shan. And it probably did to some degree. But she tells Ricard, "Hey, Danny and Deshawn want to take a shot at you. But I'm not going to let it happen." And, sort of passively, without thinking about like who Ricard is and the situation he was in, like I was expecting, and I think most people would expect, like, "Oh my God, thank you for telling me. Like, you're saving my life here. This is great." Instead, it's like, okay. And she's like, "What, do you not believe
You don't
me?"
believe me.
He's like,
And her feelings are visibly hurt.
And she's like, "Are you going to tell them?" He's like, No. I'm just processing. I'm surprised you would tell me. It's like, oh,
Horrifying stomach drop moment.
Yeah. I mean, this is her, being like, "Ricard, I love you." And he's like, "I'm surprised you'd say that this early." Like, I thought we had kind of discussed that, like, we weren't gonna talk about that. Like, and she's like, we need to go after each other eventually. And she's like, I know, but not yet.
Not yet.
Not yet. And I think that, like, in the moment, it was like, oh boy. And I felt like, what is Ricard doing? I feel like, and this is obviously pure speculation, but I feel like Ricard has already been thinking, obviously, he's been telling us and he's been telling her he wants to go against Shan. He wants to go against her soon. And I think part of this reaction is, it's not only protecting, necessarily like her emotions about like he's about to betray. If he's like, oh my god, thank you, you just saved my life, and then votes her out in the same episode, like that's a little, it's a little. I feel like that hurts a little more. But also I think his own emotions, like he's trying to find a way. Like he's probably feeling a lot of guilt in this moment that like
Yeah.
I know I want her out soon, and she making a move here that is not necessarily in her best interests. And I need to take a step back. And normally I'd be like, hey, I don't know if this is right. But now I need to take a step back and be like, I'm not going to warn her about this. And now I'm feeling guilty that like she's doing this for me, and I'm kind of like I'm going against her, and I feel like all of that is processing, and that's, I think, again, part of why he's kind of like, just like, why would you do this? Like, don't, like, you weren't. I'm surprised you would do this. Like
It's like
you're
when you
really.
know you're gonna break up with somebody and they do something really nice for you,
Yes,
and you're just
exactly.
like, and like you want to just be like, oh my god, thank you so much, but you're also just like, oh, did did you need to do that? Because like
Like,
you're feeling guilty.
in a way, you resent them for doing it because
Yes,
they're
because it makes you
provoking that
feel
feeling of
worse.
guilt, which only makes you feel guiltier.
Yeah. So Shan
Um,
Shan obviously should, and I'm sure does know here that something is very, very, very wrong.
yeah. So we get to the immunity challenge where Ricard is going to pull it out and win. And after the immunity challenge, Shan says, whew, that's a relief. Ricard is safe. I don't need to worry about that anymore. In fact, now that Ricard is safe, I'm thinking we keep things simple. We just take out Erica instead of going through with the Ricard plan. So the plan is to put all votes on Erica, but not tell Xander, so he burns his idol playing it, thinking that it might be him. Um, and this is where I feel like this is the final sort of like nail in her coffin, I think. Um, when it comes to like how Shan played this, I don't, because a lot of people are like, she shouldn't have told Ricard in the first place. Shouldn't have told him before the immunity challenge, whatever it was. I don't think that's necessarily true. I think that there's a lot of benefit to telling Ricard ahead of time. Especially since the plan is to take out Deshawn in response, right? And if you wait until after the immunity challenge to tell him, like, hey, by the way, if you hadn't won that, Ricard and Deshawn were gonna, or Danny and Deshawn were gonna try and take you out. Eh, you're a little bit less inclined to be like, oh, so you waited until after to tell me? Like, when did you
Right.
know this? Um, and also, I think it's that's fine. I think it's the combination of telling Ricard they're coming for you, but don't worry, I'm with you, and what we're gonna do is take out Deshawn to prevent this from happening. Then he wins immunity, and she says, I imagine this conversation goes, okay, you're safe now, so we don't need to take out Deshawn anymore this week or this round. We can wait. So we're just going to do the safer play. We're going to take out Erica.
Mhm.
If you're Ricard, that is absolutely no good for you. You know that Danny and Deshawn are coming for you. Leaving them in the game one more round only gives them another opportunity to take that shot. And the fact that Shan is willing to postpone it is exactly why I imagine in the very next scene, he says, Shan and her allies can take me out at any time when they want to. Like he completely is putting himself in her hands if he allows this to go down, and so he needs to do something. And I think that whether or not he was planning to do this or is thinking about doing this ahead of time, I do think that she put him in a spot where he had to do it.
I just don't understand why, like, I don't understand how this is necessarily better for him because Shan's gone and now Danny and Deshawn are still together, still wanting to take him out at 7. And now he doesn't have the only person who is willing to stick her neck out for him. So I understand what you're saying and that like but he already knows that Shan doesn't want to go to the end with him. So like I don't understand how taking out the person who is putting her life on the line for him, where does he go now? What does he do? He has to win out.
Well, I think that's a really interesting question, and it's something that I was thinking a lot about as well. Because in the moment, I had the same reaction. I was like, I don't know if I think. I mean, obviously, he has to do something, but wouldn't it have been better if he had taken the shot at Deshaun and left Shan in the game?
Yeah.
And so I tried to explore that in my head. And so I think there are pros and cons to both ultimately, and I think that there are some reasons why I think it could make sense that Shan goes instead of Deshaun. I think primarily some of the biggest pros to getting Shan out here is that first of all, it's like really seen as like his big move, right? Like he gets a
Mhm.
ton of credit. I think he's now a huge jury threat. He also does it in a way that Shan respects it a lot and will likely be campaigning for him on the jury, which I think is huge because I think she'll probably have a lot of influence on the jury. Um, it also just blows the game wide open the way that this happens because now Liana is pissed at Danny and Deshaun. And if they're not going to be a cohesive unit, then there's a ton of opportunity to rebuild the game in a shape that's more beneficial to him. He's also likely made some more headway with Erica and Heather, who also wanted Shan gone. He's now worked with them twice on 2 different votes to blindside somebody and protect the 2 of them. And if he has Erica and Heather, it puts him in a really good spot moving forward. However, Erica and Heather both also seem to have a really good relationship with Deshaun that they did not have with Shan, which is a little more
Mhm.
dangerous. Because of all the credit that Ricard gets in taking Shan out, he's now in some ways the biggest
Biggest
target in
threat.
the game with
Yep.
no other obvious shield and no strong, tight allies. And there's a pretty strong play for Danny, Deshaun, Erica, and Heather to just band together next vote and take him out if he doesn't win immunity. He has no other protection. So, pros and cons there for sure. There are definitely some big cons. However, if I look at the other side of things, pros to taking Deshaun out, none of those cons, obviously. But also, you sever that connection between him, Erica, and Heather, which is good. It gives you a little more, likelihood of being able to win the 2 of them over to your side, and they do seem to be the swings, at least based on how we're looking at things heading into next week. Shan also remains in the game, and either she was with you, maybe she voted, maybe you convinced her to go along with it, which you likely needed to in order to make it happen, or even if she's not with you, at the very least, she remains probably the bigger threat, the bigger target in the game that Erica and Heather would need to deal with before they can turn on him. Um, so you have those advantages, but there are also some big cons to trying to make this move work. The biggest of which is how? How do you actually pull this off? Because
Mhm.
um, even if he can get Erica and Heather and Xander all on board with taking Deshaun out instead of Shan, which is probably a harder feat considering that Erica and Heather were really set on wanting Shan out, um, you still only have 4 votes. And now with 4 votes, you could get Xander's extra vote, but he could have done that against Shan in the first place, right? It seemed like Xander was like, I'm not using my extra vote. I'll vote with you, but I'm not using my extra vote for you. Um, so you probably have to convince Shan to get back on board anyway, which also means she probably gets credit for the move if that does happen. And if it doesn't happen, then you're in a different situation. Not to mention the fact that Eric and Heather, because they want Shan out so much, they they will have the opportunity to, if they want to, say, okay, if you don't want to take the shot at Shan because you're too emotionally attached or whatever, that doesn't mean we can't. They could go to Deshaun and Danny and say, hey, guess what Ricard and Shan are trying to do? They're trying to take a shot at you. They're trying to backstab you. Why don't we flip it around on Shan? And now Erica and Heather have made the move, and you are completely left in the dark. Um, and then even if it does work, you now still have Shan in the final 7 with an idol. And even if she has burned Danny, that's still very dangerous. And if she hasn't burned Danny, then there's no reason for Danny, Liana, and Shan to not be working together. And you also have Xander in the game with an idol. You now don't have a huge move on your resume, and Xander's still more dangerous in the jury, which means probably at least one of Xander and Shan are making the final three, where he's got a tougher case to sell to the jury. So all of that to say, I think that there's a lot of back and forth here, and I think that ultimately you have to make the move that you think you can pull off successfully, and a lot of this is reliant on who we think Erica and Heather are likely going to gravitate toward in the next episode, and you know, considering that Ricard is probably the one that was in the position to make this decision, he's probably got more information on like his relationship with them than we do. Maybe he's wrong, maybe he's not, but I can see this going either way, and depending on how it plays out next week, I may retroactively be like, looks like he made the wrong side of that call, or maybe he made the right side of that call. But ultimately, I do think it's probably closer than certainly than I had initially thought.
Okay. I also just want to throw out there, Ricard can just tell Shan to play her idol, and then she's in the 7 without the idol, and that's how you blindside Deshawn, and then you don't need then you don't need 5 votes or 4 votes in the extra vote.
So that, but then those other votes were on. I mean, like saying that like how it all played out, so that it's Liana that goes.
It could be Liana that goes, but I also think that you could. I would have to think it through. I have not thought it through the way that you just thought through all of those scenarios. But I think if we factor in that, I do think that Shan is in a place based on how she went out on a limb for Ricard. I think she's in a place where if Ricard told her to play the idol, then she would. So let's see. You have Shan, Ricard, and Xander would vote with them, right? And Liana? Wouldn't then you have 4?
To vote Deshawn?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like, yeah, I mean,
and then the 4 of them could vote Shan, and then Shan plays the idol. I mean, or they split or whatever between
like
Shan and Liana.
Shan plus the idol would definitely make it happen. But again, that requires that Shan agrees with you, because if Shan is like, you know what, maybe not, then you're screwed.
Yeah, but I think if Ricard is open with Shan, that it's gonna be her if she doesn't.
Well, but that means that he would have already had to put the plan in place against Shan, and he would have been the one to do it, and then he's going to Shan to be like, "Look at all these people going against you," and that starts to get a little risky, because then if she questions Deshawn about it, which I think she probably would,
yeah,
and Deshawn goes, "What are you talking about? Ricard is the one that made this happen. He told me about what you said to him."
But Deshawn came up with the original plan.
Well, yeah, it's a lot
to
of
leave Shan out. Okay. But I'm just saying, I think there's a world where that is a better play for Ricard, and
I agree.
Yeah. Okay.
For sure, yeah, and again, I think for me at least, it's like how does next episode play out? That's really gonna sell for me, like which way was maybe the right way. But I do think there is a path where he takes out Deshawn here, and I think that that in an ideal world, that path is probably the most optimal. But it's always hard to say, especially when it is a little murky, especially on Survivor, because not only can you not predict what's going to happen in the future, just generally, but you also don't necessarily even fully understand what's happening in the present, because you're relying so much on the edit. So that's what we're talking about. Ricard is not down with the Erica plan. He wants to get Shan out. Today is the day for Shan to go. He pitches it to Xander, Heather, and Erica, which means he has 4, and he needs 1 more to guarantee it goes down. I mentioned this briefly already, but he didn't actually need 1 more to make this work. Xander did have an extra vote that he could have used to make it a 5-4 vote to take out Shan. But clearly, I mean, they didn't even mention that in the episode. So that to me implies that most likely Xander was just like, nah, I'm not going to use my extra vote. there could also be an aspect to this where, you know, they wanted more numbers to make this work. They wanted, you know, they wanted to cause a bit of a split within the alliance of Shan, Liana, Danny, and Deshawn, which certainly they did. And this was a lot more effective than just using the extra vote, because now there is this divide between Liana, Danny, and Deshawn. Um, but it definitely added a lot of risk to approach Deshawn and then ultimately Danny about the plan to take out Shan. They very easily could have been like, hey, Shan, do you see what Ricard is doing? This is why we needed him out. Let's clear up all of our differences and make sure Erica leaves this week. Especially once they talk about splitting votes, that opened the door for them to be able to do that. So a lot of risk here. And this is almost like, again, like this is the ideal play for taking Shan out. It really works out well for everyone involved on the other side of this. These four players, maybe not Xander. We'll talk about that, but
nobody cares what's best for Xander.
Right. So Ricard approaches Deshawn, and definitely, I mean, massive props to Ricard, not only for making this move, but in executing it. It was risky, but he clearly pulls it off really well. He says that, I know you were coming for me. And just so you know, the plan in retaliation was to take you out, is to take you out. So Ricard does not say like, oh, she was going to take you out and then changed her mind. He says, the plan is you. And here's my proof. I know that you were coming for me. And Deshawn denies. He says, I was not coming for you, which annoys Ricard. He says, this is annoying, but I need Deshawn for now. I'll take him out tomorrow. Because this is a fast game. I keep saying last week and next week because I'm talking about episodes, but it's actually like tomorrow and yesterday.
As opposed to the massive 3 days that we normally have.
Yeah. But I mean, very solid play, I think, by Ricard here. He clearly succeeds in this, and also I think ultimately gives Deshawn the excuse that he needed to take the shot that I think really wanted to take.
Yeah. And I did appreciate Ricard like telling us straight up that he knew that Deshawn was lying. Because sometimes Survivor doesn't do the best job of like telling us who knows when somebody is lying to them, which is frustrating for me to watch. So yeah, I mean, he has a healthy level of suspicion for Deshawn. Do I think he's going to be able to just vote him out next week? No, absolutely not. I don't think that's going to happen, but I hope so.
The editing does something here. The storytelling does something here that I really enjoyed. And I'm gonna try to like explain it as we go, because they basically like, especially, and it even kind of extends from before the immunity challenge, but specifically after the immunity challenge, we go from Shan, who says it's a good thing Ricard is safe. Here's the plan. It's Erica, to Ricard. The plan is not Erica. The plan is Shan. Ricard gets 4 votes. He approaches Deshawn, and he gets Deshawn on board with the Shan plan. Now we hear from Deshawn, who says, Shan turned on me. I knew this was coming. It's time to take her out. He talks with Danny, and they both agree that she's broken their allegiance. And he then goes to Heather and Erica, and he says, hey, I'm down to vote Shan. I'm in. And Erica's like, wait a minute. So who's the person they think is going to have? And she finds out that it's her. And if Shan plays her idol, then Erica is going to be in trouble. And now, so we're perspective hopping here. We're getting everybody's in like perspective on the move and their contributions, from Shan to Ricard to Deshawn to now Erica, who says,
and Heather and Xander are also playing Survivor.
Yeah. Heather and Erica are the two that are left out of
Heather
this.
And Xander.
Yeah, sorry. And so Erica says, hey, I don't want this. How about if we get one more vote, we can split the votes to make sure that even if Shan plays the idol, it's going to be not me that goes out. So she approaches Danny with Heather.
I just want to talk about this from Erica for a second, but you should finish the story.
So yeah, so she says, "Hey, like, what are you thinking?" They ask eventually, "Would you be down?" He's saying like, "Yeah, Shan did do something recently to really bother me. I don't want to blow up the game or anything." And they're like, "Would you be down to vote for her to go?" And he's like, "Yeah, I would be." And so they then approach him later. They change to a later scene where Erica says, "Hey, I want to split the votes with Danny between Liana and Shan. Would you be down to do that?" And then we finally hear the last perspective from Danny, the last piece of this puzzle. Do I want to do this? Can I trust Erica? Are we being played? He asks Deshaun, like, are we being played by Erica? And do we want to go follow through on this? I mean, at this point, he probably feels like the last piece in the puzzle, and he's wondering if he should comply essentially. And so that's where we end all of that. That whole sort of like path through the strategy.
Yeah. I want to talk about their reaction to Erica for a second.
Mhm.
Because there's two things that I would love to abolish from Survivor Forever. The first is stop calling Asian people sneaky. It's ridiculous. It has a horribly racist past. It's rooted in just so much crap in US history and in world history that like the there's so many stereotypes that I'm not going to go into, but it is an aggression. It's like not even a microaggression. It's like I'm sure that they don't know, but calling Asian people sneaky on Survivor is like so crazy that it's still happening. There's so many other words. How about, I don't know, smart. Also, anytime a woman draws in the sand, she becomes a strategic mastermind who can add 3 and 3 together, and suddenly she's the most dangerous person in this game, and we have to get her out because a woman that can count, oh my god, what a freaking threat. And when a man makes a plan, it's like, wow, great, we'll just go with that. It's just, and it's not every time, and so I don't need people pointing examples to me of a time that a man has made a plan to become a threat, but it's just like we saw this with Michaela, we're seeing it with Erica. Just like, I guess if you're a woman, do not ever like come up with a split vote plan. Okay? Don't don't pull a cowboy. You're not allowed because it makes you a strategic genius to come up with the crazy idea of splitting votes. And
Oh
I'm
boy.
just so sick of it. And I know, I'm sure that it was just like the editors being like, we need a decoy boot. Danny, talk about why everybody could be threatening. And so this is like what we showed. That's totally possible. I'm not even putting this all on Danny. It's just a very frustrating trope that like women have to do so little to be considered like a huge cunning threat. Whereas there are men who can be way out in front who can always be taken out next week. And that's why we haven't had a woman winner in a billion years.
Well, I did want to talk about Erica's decision here because in the moment I felt like, oh, I don't know about this. Like this, like I get that you're trying to safeguard from an idle play, but I feel like it was riskier to approach Danny about a split vote than it was to hope that that Shan wouldn't play the idol. Um,
I disagree because I think if you're Erica, you want to at least go out on your own terms. I think she'd rather go out on a strategic play that failed than getting idled out passively.
right, and ultimately, I think that this was a risk worth taking. And and
Yeah.
and and so the reason why is because again, like initially I was like, I don't know about this, but I wasn't fully thinking about it from I think Erica's perspective, right? People do respect Erica in the game. They do think that she is smart. They do think that she is somebody that could win in the end. But she doesn't really have anything to back that up. And if Erica's in the final three with Shan or even Danny and Deshaun, or even maybe Xander at this point. Like I think that there might be a case for her to win just based on perception alone, but I think it would be hard. I think it'd be a hard sell because she hasn't had any real power in the game. So not only is she if she succeeds here making herself safer, but she's also taking a huge chunk of the credit for this whole move by successfully getting Danny on board and orchestrating the vote split, which I really like, especially because if she does pull it off, it now puts her in a position where she has a great chance. She now, even though this is primarily, I think, going to be credited to Ricard, I think she has a ton of credit as well. And if Ricard is not in the end, I think she can almost fully be like, yeah, remember when I took Shan out and I split that vote and I made sure it wasn't me? And she gets all of that while Ricard is the main target. And she, with Heather, who is the biggest goat in the game right now, and her closest ally, which is a great spot to be in, uh, they're the swings probably moving forward. So, like, the risk was, I think, greater. I think she would have been safer to not approach Danny, but the rewards are so big that I actually feel like, okay, I'm in on this, especially because it got Deshaun and Danny to essentially vote against Liana, which further divides them and only benefits her and Heather. So I actually really like this, and ultimately the fact that it succeeds, again, only further kind of like proves that it was the right call. Again, having to be a bit more results oriented here on Survivor because we don't have all the information. So I actually ended up really liking this call by Erica, and the effectiveness of her being able to pull it off is amazing.
Yeah, and has big implications for how I feel about Erica in the Stockwatch portion.
So we get to tribal. It's tribal. It's very rarely anything that interests me at
no
tribal.
whispering.
Yeah, no whispering.
Yay!
Maybe Shan should have used some whispering. Who knows?
Heather should have had a delay of game again.
Yeah. The split vote plan works, and Shan is out. And to what you said at the start of this episode, Lita, I loved how they edited this. When the vote happened as early as it did, I was like, oh my God, it's actually like, I was still in disbelief. I was like, it must tie because there's way too much time left in this episode. But is it really going to be Shan? Like, no way. And then it did. And I think the way that they edited it perfectly fit how I was feeling, which is that, like, it was just slowly, there wasn't a big, like, boom moment. It was just kind of a slow realization of like, oh my God,
it's actually Shan.
They did it. And she's out, and the music playing was great. I really love how they put this together. I was definitely, I really felt like Shan, I felt like Shan was the winner, and I was gonna be very happy about that. So this was like, I was definitely like, but when I watched the show, I kind of relish the I like when it hurts me sometimes. So this is great.
I definitely did not think Shan was going to win, but I didn't think she was going to go out early enough. Women are not allowed to win Survivor, as you know. So I thought of any of the women, she obviously was the strongest contender. I really had her pegged as a 4th place Rob Goddess. So I'm not mourning the loss of her victory, but it was just devastating. She's one of the greatest character player combos that we've seen in quite some time. And I just can't wait to see her play Survivor again and probably be voted out first because she's such a huge threat, but I love her.
Yeah.
Get her and Ricard on The Amazing Race.
There you go. So some interesting things that happen as well, I think, while she's being voted out. She looks over and she says, "Really, D?" And they showed Danny's reaction shot. I've not paid attention to like who between Danny and Deshaun they call or she calls D.
Right.
But they showed Danny reacting to it. Obviously, we see later that seems to be most upset with Deshaun. So I do think she's probably referring to Danny here. She probably didn't expect it. She's probably like, I expected this from Deshaun, but I didn't expect it from you too, Danny.
At
and
2.
exactly.
Yeah.
And I feel like there were 3 levels of this. Like, I really expected it from Ricard to the point where kudos.
Right.
I expected it from Deshaun, but I'm disappointed in him.
Mhm.
But Danny, I didn't expect it from you. Really?
Yeah.
I'm surprised by that. On the jury, Evie says, "What a move." Tiffany says, "Bravo." So they're definitely impressed. Shan tells Ricard, even before anything else, she says, "It's okay." So I saw a lot of people like, was she saying this to put, was she saying the vote thing to put a target on Deshaun's back, or on Ricard's back? Um, I don't think so. She genuinely looks over to Ricard. She says, "It's okay." She did not want him to feel guilty for the move. I think she genuinely respected it. She stands up. She says, "Ricard, you have my vote for $1 million. Deshaun, you're a snake." And again, I think I mean, this is Shan, right? Like, influential and reactionary a little bit. I think this puts a huge target on Ricard.
I was
And
gonna say, I hate that
also Deshaun.
all that does is improve Deshaun's chances and hurts Ricard's,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
Interesting stuff though. Ultimately, again, I feel like I really love how they edited Shan throughout the season. I feel like they really have highlighted two of the primary characteristics of her game that I think ultimately led to her downfall, which is that attachment that I talked about earlier, the emotional attachment she had to the people that she played with. When they talked about the difficulty, when she talked about having to choose between her parents, and the difficulty that she faced emotionally, having to make these decisions and betray people. It's the desire not to do that, and to protect Ricard, that is contributing to her downfall here. And then also the sort of impulsive nature of her game at times, where she kind of like acts first and thinks a bit later. The idea of like going after Deshaun and then going back on the plan, revealing a bit too much information at times. It's the kind of the combination of these two things that ultimately, in my eyes, sealed her fate. And you know, it's I mean, what a story. Again, I feel like so many different stories come together here, where this is the downfall of Liana for all of those reasons. I already talked about of Shan for all of those reasons. The Liana storyline culminating in her giving up this idea of being a legendary player for now. Who knows where it goes from here. We have
I would be stunned if Liana became a legendary player.
edit wise, it's not looking great, but in the game, she has an opportunity. Even Erica, who has talked about wanting to be a lion and not just a lamb, finally has her opportunity and her place to shine. She's pulling off what people have always been worried about when it comes to Erica, which is kind of being under the radar until she has her moment, being a lamb, and then boom, morphing into a lion. And so all of that is great. I mean, and even this doesn't feel like a culmination of Deshaun's story, but it does feel like another beat in his story of the alliance that he's in, doing this for the culture, doing this for a cause versus his own self-interest, his relationship with Shan. So many things coming together in this episode, edited together so well. I loved it.
Yeah, it was beautiful. I cried.
Yeah.
It restores some faith in Survivor. And we have 7, which is always hopefully a good episode, although we've teased a twist in the next time on, which I know is on Reddit, but I have not read. So not thrilled about that. Unless it's the Outcast twist and Tiffany, Nasir, Evie, and Shan get to all compete to come back. In which case, I would be thrilled.
All right, let's talk about the Stockwatch. Let's rate these players, because I feel like this is going to be a very interesting one. If the game was working properly, I think this would be a big week here for shifting to happen. So let me pull up the. I will say, first of all, I generally I go in order from the lowest ratings to the highest ratings. I would not necessarily say that the order in which I talk about them is necessarily within, like, if two people have the same rating, just because I talk about one first doesn't necessarily mean that I think that they're worse than the other player necessarily, again. But the first person I do want to talk about, of course, is the person that was voted out, and that is Shan. Shan has had, like, up until last week, Shan had consistently been my highest rated player, like every week. And then last week, I felt like I talked about those two things kind of coming together to be her downfall in this episode. But really, I feel like the biggest flaw, the biggest downfall of Shan's game was last week when she chose to take out Nasir. I think that if Nasir is in the game, none of this happens. None of this can happen. I don't think that Shan can be voted out this week if Nasir is in the game. And that's huge. I mean, I really do feel like that was ultimately the biggest downfall of her game. And so last week I dropped her a bit, and this week I'm going to drop her a bit more. Obviously, going out of the game with an idol in her pocket, making the mistakes that she did. It's not great, but she still goes out as probably the front runner to win if she makes it to the end. She still had the social connections. She still had somebody like Liana coming to her with these ideas. I still think that even though I do think in some ways she caused her own downfall, I mean, she goes out as a player that had a huge chance to win this game. So I'm not going to be too low on Shan. Ultimately, I went with a 4 as our person voted out here this week. Lita, what do you think?
Can I give her a 12? I love her. Yeah, okay. So I think going out in that 7 or 8 spot as the person who would almost definitely win if they went to the end is not bad at all, right? Like that's something that happens. Some of our greatest players ever have gone out in that 7th and 8th spot. In my opinion. Obviously, her errors were a little more unforced than a lot of those people because a lot of the time it's just like, oh, this person didn't win immunity, so we have to do it now. Usually it's the 7, but with the extra vote, I'm counting this because it still could be an odd number of votes. So I don't know. It's out of 10.
Yes.
I'm gonna give her a 5 because I do think I think doing all of this without immunities is like without even being an immunity threat, honestly, like it's impressive like how clear it was that she was gonna win in the end and how threatened people were by her. And I do think it speaks volumes having someone like Liana, you briefly mentioned it, but having somebody actually be willing to lay down their torch for you. I mean, not literally. She didn't Janu twirl her way out of the game, laying it down for Stephanie LaGrossa. But I do think that speaks volumes because nobody has to do that ever.
Yeah, and for me, that's the biggest reason this isn't like a 3 or lower is that like in the same episode that she's voted out, she gets somebody to lay their life down in the game for her,
Yeah.
which is huge in a game like this. So she definitely gets some bonus points for that, which happens to be in the same episode that she was voted out in. So along with Shan, I had another person that I gave a 4 to, which is actually a little bit higher than I had given for this player last time. And that person is it's Heather.
She had a 4?
I gave her 4 this week. And here's why. I think this was huge for Heather. I mean, this was a good thing. Like, look, I understand that Heather is not winning this game. I understand that Heather is barely even on the show at this point. But if I'm trying to eliminate the edit bias from my head, and I'm looking at this purely from a game perspective, yes, Heather is seen as a GOAT right now, but the game was just blown wide open. And Heather was a part of that. I mean, Heather was part of this move. Even though we got this from Erica's perspective, Heather was in every conversation. She was talking to Danny. She was one of the people, like she was engaging in that conversation where they flipped Danny. She was in the conversation with Deshaun. She was in the conversation with Ricard. I can't give credit to Erica and not give any credit at all to Heather for this move, considering that they did seem to be in lockstep doing it. Now, she's still this low because it seems unlikely that she's going to get any real credit for it in the game, and that they still see her as a GOAT. But I don't think it's impossible that, we've seen that she is a player willing to stand up in the middle of tribal and try to make something happen. If she actually did manage to succeed in making a move at some point, theoretically she could have a chance to win this thing. But primarily, I'm giving her a slight boost to her rating this episode because of her part in this massive move that took place. And it will probably go back down next week.
But what part? It would have been a bigger move to not go along with it.
I mean, for Heather, if she doesn't go along with it, then Erica's out. That's not very good for her.
I guess, but I don't. So she doesn't have a choice. She doesn't get credit for making the obvious decision.
I mean, but I think like I said, I think she was involved in helping make this happen, right? Like, and it was beneficial to her game. So I give her credit for that.
Okay. That's fine. I don't know.
Well, what do you think? What do you think?
I mean, I just don't see how, like, wanting to keep her closest ally in the game and voting out the biggest threat, like, deserves credit. I don't know. And we have no knowledge that she was involved. And I don't want to say that she wasn't for sure, because I'm sure she was. And obviously editing is very biased towards women against women over 40. And so I'm sure there's all this stuff, but I can only go based on what I see on the show. And I have not seen Heather show any agency. She has no chance of winning. I'm not even just like, obviously the edit is a big part of that, but it's just like, what has she done? So she gets a 2 from me.
It's very fair. It's very fair. I'm definitely trying to see beyond the edit, which I could be very wrong about. So after Heather, I've given a couple people some 5s. The first of which is as you've already kind of alluded to, Xander. I give a 5 to Xander, which honestly almost feels generous. But I do still think he's in here with a chance to win. Now, this is higher than I had him last week, because last week I was very down on the decisions that he made. This week, I think was also not a good week ultimately for Xander, or cycle, or whatever you want, day for Xander. Not only because he wasn't even in the episode, basically, but the reason he wasn't in the episode, right? I think that first of all, what I talked about last week, where it's like he's at the final 8 with an idol and an extra vote and a chance to win a couple immunities. He could easily win his way through to the end and make that kind of like Ben or Worlds Apart, whatever, like those kinds of runs, right?
Mike.
That one, yeah.
I like rebranding him as Worlds Apart, whatever.
This is that's a viable way to win the game. We've seen it happen before. And Xander seems very primed to be able to pull something like that off, because he is a pretty likable guy, and he has that very like underdog quality to him. He's also pulled off some big moves, so that's great. And he survives this vote without having to use an extra vote or his idol, which is all great. However, he's never seemed less relevant to the strategy of the season than in this vote. That big move he made a while back is starting to feel like old news. And certainly it might not to them, because again, the pace is a lot faster than it is when we're watching it. But I don't even remember they took out Sydney, I guess. Like it just seems so not relevant to the current trajectory of the strategy. And the thing is about this whole thing, right? Like where it's like you win your way to the end, they can't take you out, and you get to the end and the jury like begrudgingly gives you their vote. Like that's what he's banking on, right? Because he's not really part of the strategy. But the reason that works is because everyone was trying to get you out and they couldn't. It's almost kind of a problem that nobody seems bothered to get rid of him anymore. He's just kind of like it's like he's a mosquito that they've been trying to swat for a little while, and eventually they're just like, you know what? Whatever. We're just going to enjoy our dinner. Like like he'll bite us if he wants.
The only reason we're even seeing him as that potential character, it's not like he's like a challenge beast necessarily. Maybe he is and he's holding back, but we've seen him win one immunity where 2 people won. Like
he did come in second in this one, but yeah.
Okay, whatever. I'm just saying, like, I think the only reason that, like, we're even putting him in we're even, like, kinda casting him in that role is because he looks like he's, like, white and male, and he is, like, looks strong, and, like, I think that, like, he's not to that point where people are worried about him winning out in the way that, like, Mike and, like, wait, whatever you said. The people that you pointed to. I always think of Mike for that. But yeah, I think that exactly to your point, it has to be that they're always going in being like, if Xander doesn't win immunity, this is the day. But they're not doing that at
I
all.
mean, it's a really great example of how perception is reality. We talk about that in these shows all the time. Perception is reality. Um, and this is an example of that because you know, typically the perception of this kind of player, especially on the island, they're trying to get them out, can't. We failed, you succeeded, we have to give you this. But you gave them that power by trying so hard to get them out. If you just say, you know what, you're not that impressive strategically, maybe we don't need to get you out. All of a sudden, even though he has that idol and he's got an immunity, and maybe there wouldn't have been an opportunity, it doesn't really matter because he didn't bother to do it. The people you respect on that island are you make that choice. And if you decide, you know what, Xander, he's young. It's like, what has he done, right? Like, other than
Yeah.
have an idol, I don't know. They get to make that call, and it seems like the call they're making is like, look, we got bigger fish to fry,
Yeah.
which is not great for Xander. And I feel like that could really prevent him from winning a jury vote in the end. Now, I do not think that he's drawing dead by any means. I think that
No.
he absolutely, all it takes is for them to be like in the next cycle, be like, hey, now is the time to get Xander out. Then he plays the idol. Then he wins immunity. Then he wins immunity. And now all of a sudden he's gone back to that position of they've tried to get him out and they couldn't. And maybe he has a shot there. Or maybe even now that the game has been blown wide open, he's able to get in there, get in the mix strategically and do something, make something happen. But right now it's starting to look like I don't mind sitting next to Xander in the end at all.
Yeah. I also he's definitely not drawing dead because of all the reasons that you said, and also because um I don't I don't think this is likely by any means, but I wanna bring up the possibility of going in next week, him maybe picking up Liana, Heather, and Erica. Um doesn't even need to use this extra vote. He's looking at it like, look, there's four of us who are clearly on the bottom, or not even on the bottom because it's not like Ricard and Deshawn and Danny are aligned, but there's four of us who are needing to prove ourselves more so than Danny, Deshawn, and Ricard for whatever reason, very different reasons for all four of them. Maybe they make something happen. Maybe they can't pick up Liana or Erica, or people who maybe are trying to make their own games, but he still has that extra vote. I think that he could potentially be like the leader of the stragglers, and he wins out of that group.
Yeah, I think that's an option. I mean, I don't know how likely it is that Liana,
Yeah.
as you said, joins this group, but
But he's got the extra vote and the idol, so
yeah,
he doesn't actually he only needs two other people if he
yeah.
wants to blow all of his advantages at once.
All right. So, do you have a number rating for him?
Yeah, I'm gonna give him a 5 because I do think it's possible that he's gonna win. I
All
don't think
right.
it's likely though.
So, the other person I gave a 5 to, and we've already talked about this. They really are two peas in a pod here. It's Liana, and now, honestly, I think that her position in some ways has improved with Shan leaving. Kind of, I mean, very much so against her will. But with Shan gone, I do think she has a much better shot at winning the game because, I mean, as we just saw, and I kind of had assumed this, that she was either willing to lose to Shan or didn't realize that she would lose to Shan, but either way, never willing to betray Shan and thus had very little chance to win. But now that Shan is gone, she's not in that completely deadlocked, can't win position anymore. And with Shan gone, she also has the opportunity to build more of a solo resume that can get her into a position where she could win. Plus, with Shan on the jury, if she's not sitting next to Ricard, I do think that Shan could probably help put some work in for her against anybody else that she's sitting next to, especially if she has done some things to bolster her resume by that point. So I do think that her position has improved. However, considering all of what we've seen from her prior to this, I don't have a ton of faith that she will be capable of making something happen, because she didn't do anything to put herself in this position. I do think she has a long way to go to win the respect of the jury, especially considering all of her competition that still exists, with now Ricard being a big threat, even Erica now being a jury threat, Deshawn still being a jury threat, Danny, I think, still being probably at least a couple of steps ahead of her in terms of the jury, and even Xander himself with that big move. I mean, Xander made a fool of her in tribal. So even though Xander might not have a win locked in, he probably is going to have a hard time losing to Liana, who he made a fool of. So she still has a long way to go, but I do think her position has improved, and ultimately that balances out back to this 5 for now. But I'm definitely curious to see where she goes from here.
I love her, and she was my winner pick, but I think I have to rate her lower than Xander. I have to give her a 4 because I think it's far less likely that she wins than Xander. I don't know who she's winning against. And I also think that that's maybe okay because she's shown that in this last episode that winning isn't necessarily the most important thing to her anymore, and I think she's had a great experience and I love her.
All right, let's now let's do a little jump, because I gave nobody a 6 this week. Instead I'm gonna jump up to a 7, and I'm gonna talk about Ricard. I'm gonna give a 7. Yeah. So this was one of the toughest things that I had to do, rate these last 4 players. And I actually had to like sit down. I talk a lot about, like, I try to rate based on, episode performance, short-term safety, long-term prospects to win the game. Those kind of 3 major elements. And this is the first time I really had to like really hone in and pick, like, okay, so if I'm judging, like, this episode, he's really good. Like, this episode is like a 9 out of 10 in terms of performance in an episode. But short-term safety is more like a 5 out of 10, because I think he's in a lot of danger next week. Then long-term prospects have improved for him. But he still has a tough path to get there. And it was really hard to really like narrow down exactly where I wanted to put people like Ricard and everyone else that I'm going to talk about from this point forward. But I ultimately landed on a 7 here for Ricard. And that's because I did really like the move, and that's part of why his rating is getting boosted up a bit here. I do think that for all the reasons we talked about, where there are a lot of cons to keeping or to taking Shan out and keeping Deshawn in the game, I do think his chances to win the game have improved. I also feel like he's in so much danger. I mean, when I think about the next vote, again, I'm looking at Erica and Heather as the swings. I'm looking at, you either have Erica and Heather side with Danny and Deshawn, or they don't. And that means that, in my eyes, it's Ricard or probably Danny or Deshawn that goes, unless the immunity gets weird, right? Which it probably will. But it's just so hard to see how he survives. Why would Erica and Heather side with Ricard when they can make an easy majority with Danny and Deshawn, take out Ricard, and now they can easily pick up, like a Xander or Liana or something like that, especially if Liana's not with them. Maybe if Liana is with them, then that changes the formula. But I feel like that's an easy move for them to make. To side with Ricard means you have to either pick up Liana or Xander. Picking up Xander is not the worst move in the world for them if they take out Deshawn. But then you still have to deal with Ricard, and maybe then you deal with Ricard the next time. Because that's the thing. Even if they do side with Ricard next week, once you take out Deshawn and or Danny, the move is to pendulum back over and then take out Ricard the next week. And Ricard doesn't have any like real solid allies left. He had Shan, who's willing to stick her neck out for him. Nobody else in this game is willing to do that for Ricard. He has no real allies left, unless he's a lot closer to Erica and Heather than I think he is, which he might be. But because of how much danger I see him in, not only in the short term, but even if he survives the short term, how does he get all the way to the end now that he's such a big threat? That for me is what's holding him back from something like an 8, even though I do think his play this episode was really solid. and worthy of, again, I gave the play itself like a 9 out of 10. But his prospects are still pretty treacherous, and he still has one more big hurdle, I think, to get over before I can really go all in on Ricard.
Wow. I still, after hearing everything, all the pros and cons, I don't think the taking out Shan was the move for him. I just don't see taking out the only person who's willing to go out on a limb for you as being the move at 8. So I'm gonna have him as a 6 because of all the reasons you said. Where is he going? How is he getting to the end? It is too far away for him to win out. He's clearly good at challenges, but he's not. I mean, he's not Malcolm. So I don't see where this is going, but I do see him as a huge jury threat. So by virtue of being able to win, as opposed to some other people in the game, he's going to be higher than anybody that we've gone through so far.
There you go. All right. So another person I gave a 7 to this week is Deshaun. Yeah. A little bit lower than I was on him last week, mostly because I feel like this was not the best series of events that could have occurred for Deshaun. Yes, Shan is now out, and in some ways that benefits him, but he didn't make the move to take Shan out, but also gets all the blowback from it from Liana. So like this is kind of like the worst way that this could have happened, because I think it gives credit to Ricard and Erica and gives them the potential to be able to beat him in a jury vote now. Whereas prior to this, I don't think they could have. And again, it puts him in a spot where like he doesn't even get to like claim innocence from Liana because he helped split the vote against her and was in on this whole thing. And Shan clearly is like super pissed about this, and would seemingly be more willing to vote either Danny or Ricard or probably even Liana. And so if Shan has any amount of influence on the jury, that's not great for Deshaun in that sense. And I do think that he is in some danger next week. If Erica and Heather decide to side with Ricard, we know that Ricard is coming for Deshaun, or at least that was the plan. And he could be out as early as next episode. Although I don't think he's in quite as much danger as Ricard, I do think it's possible. And so I think that this is it's kind of a tough decision. I'm also giving him a bit of a hit because of the call to approach Liana about the Shan going against Ricard and leaving Shan out of it. I felt like he approached that all wrong, and I think it very predictably backfired. So that's also giving him a bit of a hit here in the ratings, where maybe he would have made an 8 without that move, but instead it's going to be a 7 for me.
Wow. I mean, I again have not thought these through as much. I'm not really I'm never gonna pretend to be like a huge strategy person. But I don't do Edgic, okay? I'm not trying to say that I do. He's winning. Come on. He's winning. I know he's winning. And I'm not spoiled. This is me, and somebody's going to have a clip of this when he doesn't win and he's voted out next week, and it's going to be embarrassing for me. But I just think he's the nucleus of everything. I think getting the blowback, like you said, like maybe it's the worst of it, but you don't get blowback without getting some credit, without people thinking that you are responsible for it. So I think that he's still the one calling the shots. I think he is not seen as a huge threat because he's hitched his wagon to a professional football player. And also, like, there are people who are much more out in front strategically, like Ricard. He doesn't have like the advantage target that Xander has. I just think anybody else who has a potential of winning in this game, which, let's be real, to me is the men. Right now, I think that he is the one who's in the best position. I'm giving him an 8.
All right. Well, I have more 7s to give out.
Wow.
And the next 7 here is going to be Danny. For very similar reasons. I feel like Danny, when comparing Danny to Deshaun right now as a duo, I think that Danny is a little bit less likely to win a jury vote, because I think that he's seen as less of the sort of like strategic power in the game. He also seems to have fewer social relationships. Again, Deshaun is the one that had the relationship with Evie. Deshaun is the one that has the closer relationship with Erica and Heather. And so I think that Deshaun has more power in the game in that sense, and thus is more likely to be respected at the end of the game and get those jury votes. But he has now pissed some people off. But I think he's also a bit safer than Deshaun. I think that he's seen as the lesser threat. Being seen as the lesser threat has also made him less likely to be the one voted out. And I think he's also very likable. I think a lot of people see him as a solid guy. I think that's why Shan was so surprised when he was in on the vote against her. And so ultimately, I similarly docked him for, he also approached Liana with the Ricard plan. I think that was just as much a mistake for him as it was for Deshaun. And so I also gave him a 7.
I will stick with you on the 7, but stand by that Deshaun is one more point above him, because I think that Danny's game is not. I think he's going to get all of the negative feedback on the moves that Deshaun gets without the strategic credit, and I just think that Deshaun is in a better position because of that.
Mm-hmm. So that finally leaves, of course, Erica, the final person here to talk about. And this it kind of surprised me as I went through here, but Erica actually is at the top of my list this week. I gave Erica an 8, and I was surprised because I don't even know. I feel like I don't know if Erica's ever breached a 5 for me all season long. But last week I gave her a 4. And she has gone all the way up to an 8. This is the magic of the Survivor Stockwatch, because this is not something that would happen in Big Brother, probably. But I mean, I just feel like there's so much that's going well for her here with this particular episode. I think she gets massive credit for the Shan. I kind of talked about this already, but she gets massive credit for the Shan move. She pulls off this split vote from a place of no power. I mean, she's at the bottom, and she managed to, from the bottom, pull off a split vote move that didn't benefit anybody except for her and hurt everybody except for her, in order to protect her. And by doing so, gets tons of credit, adding on to, people already suspected that she could be good at this game. Now they have evidence. She has something to put on her resume, something that would give her a potential win if she got to the end. And on top of that, I've been saying consistently all throughout this podcast that her and Heather are, in my opinion, the most likely people to be in power next week in the next cycle. She's probably going to be in a position where she is the swing vote, and she gets to decide which path she wants to take to the end. And that puts her in one of the most safe positions. Obviously, Heather is safer than her, and she could absolutely still be out with how much, somebody like Danny seems to be fearful of her in the game. But Danny he's also fearful of Ricard, and he has to deal with Ricard. They also still have to deal with Xander. They have to deal with a potentially pissed off Liana. There's a lot of things that they have to deal with. Is Erica going to be the person they deal with first when Ricard is more dangerous in immunity challenges? Probably not. And that means that Erica will probably be the person that gets to decide where she wants to move forward from here. And that puts her, I think, in a really good position to not only make it furthest. She's the safest, one of the safest top contenders in the game right now. She also has now a huge opportunity to win this game. Now, I will say personally, edit-wise, I don't know that I think she's going to win this. She was so invisible for so long. But game-wise, I really do feel like she has a really good shot. And I will also say that I've been very surprised by edit things this season. I feel like they may have been changing things up. So who knows? Heather could win this game based on the edit, as far as we know. Do I realistically think it will happen at this time? No, but I do think that game-wise, she is in the position now where she is probably one of the more likely winners based on the events of this episode.
I do think it's completely possible that Erica wins, which puts her above half the field already. However, I do think just the fixation that people have on her being a threat is going to be too much of a problem for her. I don't think she sees the final 3. I think she's wonderful. I think she's great. I think she was really great this episode, but I have to give her a 7 because I don't see her in the final 3. But the fact that if she gets there, she could win is huge, and was not something that I thought before this episode.
It is huge. All right. Well, that's what we have for the Stockwatch this week. Definitely some big changes, some big shifts here in the numbers. I really feel like next episode is going to be a huge factor in like where things go from here. Obviously, things could pendulum, as I said, but like, the next episode is where we're really going to see like who has the chops to take back control of this game, because it's been blown wide open, and the power is truly up for grabs here in Survivor, and I'm going to be very curious to see who takes it. But great episode. I feel like, yes, the advantages have been a little annoying here and there. Yes, there were a couple of like stinker episodes at the start of the season, but I feel like this has been a really good season. I'm really, really enjoying it. And I feel like very like Winners at War was Winners at War for me, at least. But like it's hard for me to remember a better season than this in recent years beyond Winners at War.
I mean, a good cast just goes a long way. I also hated Winners at War, so definitely the best season since David versus Goliath. Wow, a whole 4 seasons.
I
But
can't remember which number that one was.
that was 37.
Okay, yeah, I went as far as 38 in my head.
In recent memory, 3 seasons.
Well, to be fair, it's been 2 years.
It's been years, yeah.
Right? So an extra year in there.
Easily the best season in the last 2 years.
I mean, 2 years, like with the Winners at War, a year off.
I know. But yeah, Survivor has always been so much more about the characters that it has about the strategy for me. So to have a just like really, really dynamic cast where I look at everybody and I'm like, I just think about all of the seasons where, I'm thinking of something about something like Worlds Apart, where it's like at this point, it was like, I like Shireen. It's not like she's like my favorite person ever, but in that season, I was like so all in on her because I was like, oh my God, I don't want it to be anybody else at the final 8 or wherever it was that she went out. Whereas this season, I'm like not actively rooting against anybody. I'm rooting against Deshaun because I felt so long like he's going to win and I like to be surprised. But that has nothing to do with him personally. So just looking at these 7 people and being like, I would be fine with any of you having $1 million is so lovely that I don't have to just like worry about what people are going to be doing with that $1 million.
Yeah.
Because I don't like bad people winning money.
All right. Well, that's what we have for you this week. Thank you all for joining us here on a Friday morning / afternoon. And I'll be live on Twitch as well, twitch.tv/Taran Armstrong. If you're curious about more of my wrong thoughts on the edit, I'll be talking more about the Survivor edit over on Twitch, as well as talking about I also want to talk some more about the Wheel of Time. I was on a post-show recap about Curb Your Enthusiasm and about Wheel of Time this week, so you can check both of those out. But if you've not checked out the Wheel of Time, you should definitely do so, because episode 4 was really, really good. I'm super excited to talk about it. So find me over on Twitch, twitch.tv/Taran Armstrong, for all of that TV talk. You can also find me on Twitter at Armstrong Taran. Lita, where can people find you?
You can find me on Twitter at Lita Tweeted. I'm private, but request me. I'm going to post a couple links after this about kind of Asian American stereotypes. And if you want to read more about that, to talk about like what I'm talking about on this episode. And then I'm also going to I posted it after Big Brother, but I'm going to post a book called But Some of Us Are Brave that is kind of about the intersection of Blackness and womanhood in the identity space. You can follow me on Instagram at Lita Graham. You can follow my dog on Instagram at Sassy Cassie PGH. I think that's it. Read a book.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Lita, for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
have you on. And thank you again to the listeners and the watchers, and the watchers of the watchers, I guess.
Is that a Marvel thing? See, I know things. There's a Watcher in Marvel.
So I was mostly going for Watchmen, which I believe
Oh,
was DC,
DC. Yep.
but that's what we have for you. Thank you all for joining us. I will see all of you next time.